Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, brought to you by the Capital One Spark Cash Plus card. What could unlimited 2% cash back do for your business? Capital One, what's in your wallet? I'm Jamie Eisenberg, that's Dave Richard, that's Heath Cummings, and it's time for your starts and sits for week number 9. Of course, we'll start with the positive, and we'll start with the start of the week, and Justin Fields is in for another big game. At least that's the hope. I don't think Bradley Chubb is going to ruin Justin Fields, at least to the point where you should be avoiding him, because he's been fantastic over the last month, starting with an 18-point game in Week 5 against Minnesota, building to the 30-point game we saw last week. It's been 2 back-to-back games after the coming out party on Monday night against the Patriots, and this Dolphins defense allows just over 21 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I think it'll be some garbage time, because I think the Dolphins are going to be playing with the lead in this game, but Justin Fields has a chance to be a top 12 quarterback. I'm surprised you're not a little bit more optimistic, Keith, but you see where we like him here as a starter. Sportsline not necessarily on board yet, but that might change. I just think that Fields, with what he's done with his legs, 60 or more yards on the ground in 3 straight games, 2 touchdowns on the ground in back-to-back weeks. He will continue to make plays, and hopefully Chase Claypool being on the roster now will help things. So Heath, what do we have to do to bump up that ranking a little bit to put him in the top 10?
You got to get Vegas to be a little bit more believers in this Bears offense. They've still got one of the lowest implied totals on the slate at 20.25, and so it's hard to project 3 touchdowns when the team isn't implied to score 3 touchdowns. I do think 2 is a decent possibility. I think he'll be a low-end starter.
When he's been pressured over his last 4 games, he's taken off. He's averaging over 9 yards per rush when the pressure's on. What do the Dolphins do? Almost more than anybody else in the league. Blitz, blitz, blitz. They put the pressure on quarterbacks, and now they've got Bradley Chubb. Yes, it's going to result in some sacks and maybe a turnover for Justin Fields, but I think he could end up getting 100 rushing yards in this game. He's going to be running all over the place, and he's been better as a passer over his last 4 games too. 64% completion rate, way better than where he was in the first 4 games of the season.
Should be fun to see Justin Fields operate. Again, 6 teams on a bye, a lot of quarterback power missing, and so Justin Fields, great replacement option if he's still on your waiver wire. Other starting options for me, another quarterback that should be back in the good graces of fantasy managers, that's Aaron Rodgers. I like him along with some other players here, as you see. Deontay Foreman, don't even worry about Chuba Hubbard. Start Foreman with confidence. Terry McLaurin, Jacoby Myers, and Robert Tonyan. In terms of McLaurin, he must be saying, you know what, Carson Wentz? You might want to just sit out the rest of the season. The last 2 weeks have been absolutely fantastic for McLaurin. Now, only 8 targets each of those last 2 weeks, but he's getting the job done. Touchdown 2 games ago, 100 yards against the Colts, and those were very good secondaries that he's faced in the Packers and the Colts in back-to-back weeks. This Vikings defense, not exactly the same, and I think we'll see Terry McLaurin to continue to thrive with Taylor Heineke under center. So I like that combination, how it's been working. Should continue for at least 1 more week. Jacoby Myers is interesting because he's now taking on that Colts defense, but he's been absolutely fantastic. A touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games, and he's facing this Colts defense. While they've been good, a receiver has scored 12 or more PPR points in 7 of 8 games. So the floor should be there for Myers. Targets will definitely be there. Production should be there as well. I think you can even start him in non-PPR. We don't usually say that about Jacoby Myers, but I like the setup for him. So very excited about Myers and McLaurin as receivers you can buy into for this week. Keith, let's take a look at your starts. You got Geno Smith, Raheem Mostert, and Antonio Gibson in the backfield, Josh Palmer, and DJ Moore. Let's start with Geno Smith because he did not play well against the Cardinals in the first meeting. But this game, you're talking about Vegas, they're expecting it to be a very high-scoring affair, and Geno Smith fared better this time around.
Yeah, Adam Azer's talked about some things about how this Arizona defense matches up well with Seattle offense. I don't discount all of that, but I still think this Arizona defense is abysmal. They have given up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks in the 2. You think maybe they figured things out after the Geno Smith game. The 2 games since, they've given up combined 62 fantasy points to Andy Dalton and Kirk Cousins. I would expect Geno Smith to get right back to what he's done the last 2 weeks, over 20 fantasy points in both of them, a top 10 quarterback for me.
A lot of people questioning what to do with Raheem Mostert now that Jeff Wilson is on the team, because Jeff Wilson, not normal trade partner or trade acquisition, because he knows the coach. He should know the language. He should know the system. Some verbiage will be different, but should not take him long to pick things up. Is he going to ruin what has been a good stretch run for Raheem Mostert?
I think it will be a 2-back system, but it's been a 2 or 2.5-back system for most of the year in Miami. So I don't expect Jeff Wilson to come in and take 50% of the touches. This is a fantastic matchup for Mostert. He's still the best back when he's healthy. The problem for Raheem Mostert is he's never had more than 137 carries in the season. He's already got over 100 so far this year. They needed better insurance, and they didn't trust Chase Edmonds. I think Wilson is insurance for Mostert, not somebody who's going to crush him this week.
I agree, especially this week. Maybe Wilson just kind of takes it easy a little bit and then eventually moves into a role where he takes maybe 35 to 40% of the snaps away from Mostert. And Mostert is going to be a week-to-week proposition in fantasy, Jamie, because we know that if he gets hurt, he's not going to be the same guy if he's even on the field. So for now, use him. The second worst run defense in the NFL right now behind Houston is Chicago. They're giving up over 150 rush yards per game on the ground. And they just traded away Roquan Smith. Should be smooth sailing for Raheem Mostert.
Hope so. It's just a matter of how much will Mike McDaniel go, I like that guy. He's pretty good. All right, now you got to work with me here. Ready? You back up the chair a little bit. You get to stand up. We're in the microphones. You get to stand up now.
Okay.
Yep, you can stand up in the studio.
Yes.
Okay, stand up. Just push your chair out.
All right.
Just take a little walk around your chair.
Okay.
This is your victory lap.
Oh, okay, good.
Yep, this is your victory lap.
Yes.
All right, we're going to talk about DJ Moore.
Okay.
So I know it's been rough.
Yes.
It's been a tough go. Last 2 weeks have been fantastic. Sing the praises of DJ Moore.
I clearly said at the beginning of the year, starting in week 8, DJ Moore is going to be a top 5, or 7, week 7, DJ Moore is going to be a top 5 wide receiver. He's been the number 2 wide receiver in fantasy since PJ Walker. All those things you said about Terry McLaurin and Taylor Heineke, we can just say those about DJ Moore and PJ Walker. And it wasn't just the big play last week. Walker actually missed Moore wide open down the field. He should have had an even bigger game last week. He is locked into a 35% target share. He's locked into 10 targets per week. And somehow, the number 1 corner for each of his opponents keeps getting hurt the week before he plays them. That's happened again with the Bengals.
Hey, the circumstances be what they are. He's been producing. So he was at 5 for 90 before that big play.
Yeah.
So still 14 PPR points. It wasn't exactly like it was bad without the misplay there. So DJ Moore's in a good spot. You deserve your victory lap for now. Hopefully you get to do one at the end of the season. Well, we'll do a big one around the big desk in the other studio. Let's talk about your starts.
That'll
Dave,
take
here.
an hour.
Tom Brady, Jamal Williams, Juju, Gerald Everett, and Evan Ingram, a couple tight ends there. So we're going to save Brady for a later conversation. Let's start with Juju Smith-Schuster coming off of a bye week. They added a piece. They're bringing Kadarius Toney. It's a matchup that is very favorable for receivers who make plays down the field. But Juju's last 2 games have been fantastic. Is it going to be 3 in a row?
I think it is going to be 3 in a row, and I think it's more about receivers that play outside. First of all, just overall, Tennessee ranks 4th in most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, bottom 8 in catch rate, and yards per catch to outside receivers. They are terrible out there, and that's where Smith-Schuster's been in his past 2 games. He's not been that slot guy that we saw in Pittsburgh. Recently, he's been playing two-thirds of his snaps out wide, and he's been doing really, really well with them. I think he keeps that role. So I'm a big fan of Juju Smith-Schuster this week. He'll be the one, along with Travis Kelce, that you should be able to count on game to game coming through with good fantasy production.
Any concern about who the second, or not just a concern, who's going to be the second guy? If you had to pick between MVS, Hardman, and Toney, and someone to take a flyer on because of the Brandon Cook situation, for example, who would it be?
And you know that it's not going to be a sure thing from game to game because Kelce is also going to get his targets. I'm going to say Hardman because he's been getting a lot of opportunities near the goal line lately. So we could see him catching a touchdown pass, like one of those little pop passes that Patrick Mahomes likes to give, and then maybe 3 or 4 other catches on top of it.
You agree?
I would go with MVS just because Tennessee's given up a lot of big plays this year, and MVS is the downfield guy.
Yeah, I would lean MVS also just because Hardman does feel a little fluky, and maybe that's the snaps that maybe Toney takes a little bit of. But certainly the production's been there for for Hardman, 11 more PPR points in 3 straight.
We all kind of hope it's there for Toney, though, right? Because he's so much fun to watch.
It's not going to be this week, but yes,
No.
Eventually you hope to see Kadarius Toney making plays in this Chiefs offense. All right, talk about Evan Ingram because last week first touchdown, but 10 or more PPR points 3 of his last 4 games. Does he keep going in this matchup against the
I mean,
Ravens?
the target volume's been great. At least 6 targets in each of his past 4 games, 4 catches in each of his past 4, and 50 or more yards in 3 of his past 4 games. It's kind of rare for tight ends not named Kelce or Andrews to have that type of production. It's the touchdowns that's an issue. But the Raiders have allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends this year. That's the 3rd most in football. They've actually given up 9 or more PPR points to a tight end in all but 2 games this year. That includes last week against New Orleans. Taysom Hill still found 8 PPR points, by the way. So I think Evan Ingram is one of those safe tight ends. We can't really call him a streamer anymore. He might have been on your waiver wire, but he shouldn't be. In PPR, he's a top 10 guy.